And we are live. Excellent.
Awesome.
Kevin, thanks a million for coming.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
This is what you get for being a top tipper on the channel. Private invites. I think one of only 2 tips I've ever received, so I will take it gracefully. But seriously, thanks a million for coming. Obviously, for somebody like myself who's trying to get the YouTube channel and things off the ground as well, seeing the success that your channel is having and everything else is obviously just brilliant to see, because it gives people some hope that you can build a business and everything else via making cool things. So congrats first off for just the major success. I think might as well jump straight in. One of the main things is you started back in 2016.
Yes.
All the way back then. Were you consistent since like October 2016 when you started all the way to now? Or did you like pick up the pace at any point, drop off, or what did the journey look like if it was the summary? Because I'm just curious, like I know myself, even for time now, I'm like, should I just throw in the towel? Or do I continue? Because you see the trend start to grow slightly, and it's that's, I suppose, the endorphins hitting us and saying, yes, I like that like button.
Yeah. I was really consistent for the most part the entire way through. When I started the channel, I did it. It was really for me that I was starting it. So like it was more of a passion project, hobby type of thing that I was starting up. And I told myself I'd do one video a week, and that every Wednesday, one video a week, and I'd just be consistent with that. I did that because I know myself, and I'm notorious for starting new things, and then I learn a little bit about it, and then I stop. It drives my wife nuts. She's always complaining because I'm spending money, on books and other things to learn something. I'm one of those people who likes learning, so I learn it and then I stop doing it. So I didn't want to do that with the YouTube channel, and so I sort of set myself that goal of trying to be consistent. I did take breaks every now and then just because I saw that I was being pulled too thin. So, I'd have between full-time work, my family, and trying to squeeze in videos every week, every now and then, I just had to take like 2, 3, 4 weeks off. So it did happen, but I'd say like maybe a 2-week break twice a year type of thing. So like it wasn't these big blocks of inconsistency, for the most part anyway.
Nice. And were you loading up videos beforehand? Because like I know for myself, I'm sorry for everyone else in the chat here. This is just pure selfish. The selfish me is coming out for questions I want answered. Did you like line up videos, or were you definitely were you ever working on like Tuesday night saying, no, I said I'd do this thing, so now I need to put out this thing?
Yeah, I always wanted to have a backlog of videos, and it never would happen. I had at one point I'd made one extra video that I'd sort of stored away on the side if ever I was sick, and then I ended up using it like really early on, and then never had one again. So it was usually I'd record videos usually on Monday night, and then I would edit them on Tuesday and upload it, and then actually have it published on the Wednesday, and that was pretty consistent for like 4 years.
Nice. That's
Yeah.
and it's consistency. I think if there's ever a sign, because I think what for the growth of your channel especially, the very interesting thing is wasn't like a one-hit wonder, or it was just raw output. Like it was just consistently, time after time, you were just adding videos, and they were just always like, once people found you, they found your backlog, and it was always the consistent quality, a consistent thing that people were interested in. And I guess that's another thing, is like, where did the niche come from? What made you decide CSS? But it's also just kind of, it's amazing to see that just pure persistence can create such a huge following as well. I don't know if that's an insult or a compliment or whatever else it is, but like you've done amazing things with just sheer persistence on this as well. And clearly, like I tuned into your live stream the other day, over 600 people watching. It's phenomenal to me. It's just to see it.
Yeah, it's been it's definitely in the early on. The persistence, like me having dedicated, saying I'm doing it, was important because nobody was watching for the first like 6 months to a year. A year is when, like 9 months to a year is when people actually started watching the videos a little bit. It took me 6 months to get 100 subscribers, just to give a little bit of an idea. And I don't, yeah, I mean, it was just literally persistence a little bit. As you said, like it would start, I don't know what it was though. YouTube at one point started picking my videos up for search, and deciding that they were good for, search results, because that's where a lot of the early traffic was coming from. But it was
Yeah.
all my old videos that I'd already done that nobody had ever watched. So I don't know why all of a sudden they decided that, hey, these are actually good videos 9 months to 18 months after they were made. But that definitely helped. And that's, I don't, if it never gained traction, I don't know how long it would have been, but it's a little bit like you said before, like even when you're getting like 30 views on a video and then the next video gets 32 views, you sort of get that like, oh, it's growing. Like you're looking at your analytics all the time and you're like, yes. So definitely.
Hashtag influencer. Everyone wants to listen to me and my opinions. No, it definitely, it does give you a kick, just an extra notch. But it's also the same of like, sometimes you put out a video that's just a flop, and then you're like, oh, what's the point?
Yeah.
I put so much effort into this and nobody gets it, or you realize again, I think that's a nice part of doing it for you as a person. I know for myself it was I had a meetup in Dublin that was starting to really gain some traction, and it kind of hurt me that I couldn't keep building that network and community that COVID hit. So I had literally just bought a camera and a microphone to record my meetups. And then I didn't get to use it. So I said, well, I spent a bunch of money trying to make the meetups get recorded. So I might as well try it on YouTube from home, and it pivoted it. But very, very similar to what you said, my videos picked up just like my oldest videos are actually my most viewed now consistently. Like I get a 200 to 300 views a day on my oldest videos. So again, like it is just like, I guess YouTube picks it up and says, oh, people are consistently looking for this topic and they're finding this useful, I guess. I don't know. They're smarter than me anyway. I'll be happy if they're sending people my way anyway. And I say that's a smart decision. I'm going to have to open a beer here as well, or else. You have a homebrew, you were saying as well, yeah. Kevin.
I do. It should be a little clearer than that, but we'll see if it's any good.
Yeah, well, it's whatever came off the bath that was brewing it in.
Actually, that's not bad. Kind of happy.
See lots of people saying hello in the chat as well. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah.
Excellent. And so you've done something that I envy, but I also can't even imagine doing. And we talked a little bit about this offline. Is your courses, and you have just made a ton of courses. I was just checking. I didn't realize how many courses you had, because I thought you only made your first course last year. Was it, or was it before that? Oh, so you literally only started last year making courses?
No. My first course was actually, I don't even remember what year it would have been now. Maybe 2018. I made my SaaS course. And it's been closed since then. I've been supposed to, that was my first course, and I was supposed to update it and then relaunch it, and then they made a lot of changes to SaaS, and then I got doing. So I made that course. I sort of hinted at that before when we were chatting, but I have no idea how I made that course. Between still making a weekly YouTube video and working full time and dealing with the family, I thought it would be a good idea to make a course. My channel wasn't that big. I must have crossed 10,000 subscribers by that point, though, just because I don't know if I would have thought I could sell anything if I had less than that. And I decided to make that course because it was something that I was really into and enjoying, and I wanted to help other people with it. And it just took me so long to do, because of doing all my other commitments, that was just getting squeezed in. So it was really hard to make that course. But it ended up, at the time, was like, I was super happy with the results. I I don't remember the numbers on it. It's been a while now, but I remember just being like, wow, that's so exciting. It's, people actually bought it. That was just like, holy crap, people have bought something that I made. That's incredible. Um, and I had plans at the time. It was like an open close launch, and I had plans on updating it pretty soon after that. And that's when, right as I was writing, like going through the material and analyzing it, getting ready to do the relaunch of it, when Scrimba reached out to me and asked if I would make a course with them. And at the time, Scrimba hadn't monetized at all. They were still a free platform. So I was going to be their first free course. And I really hummed and hawed on it. I wasn't sure, because I really am a big believer in making content for yourself and not on other platforms. But because their platform's really cool, and because it was a lot, it wasn't going to be like a Udemy in the sense of anybody could put a course up. So even though they were planning on monetizing, like they're curating who their instructors are and stuff like that. And so like sort of because of those two things, I said, you know what, why not? If anything else, it'd be a fun experience. And that one ended up being, once again, a lot more work than I thought it would be. I was still working full time, so I was doing with the family, and then like we were on family vacation, and I was like, going and doing all the vacationing stuff during the day, and then we'd be in our Airbnb, and I was just editing videos all night long. Like it was, especially we set a deadline on it, and I'm just like, holy crap! Like what did I get myself into with this one?
And you're not single.
No, yeah, I have two kids and everything. Like it's
Yeah, you are. You are, because like I don't have that. I don't have too much responsibility. I have my partner here as well, but like we don't have kids or anything. But I know even with work that it's just the idea of how many hours goes into that. Just from hearing from the likes of yourself, it's just like, oh no, I don't know where I'm going to carve out that time. Well, what does the time look like, or say even your last course? What did the time look like? Because let's say you kind of know it's a hard thing to do now, so I'm guessing you planned a little bit more. So if we take that as potentially a successful way of building a course, I'm sure there was plenty of hiccups in there as well. But like, what is like planning a course to the actual execution of recording a course, or do you like plan and record in one, or what does the whole process and timeline look like?
Yeah, so I have the one advantage I have is before I was working full time was I was a teacher, so I was getting into the whole planning courses, curriculums, planning my lessons, and all of that. So I'm not a very good planner in general. I just do stuff, but I'd had to build up my skills on that. So that's obviously helped a lot in that I definitely would plan out the entire course, everything that I want to cover in it. I'd break it down by module. Looking at it like that, you're also seeing oh yeah, I forgot that I need, I can't talk about that without having already talked about this. So you're moving things around. I use Notion for that, where I just have like all the list of all the lessons I have with different sections of content, and it makes it easy to sort of, well, actually I start with just like bullet points, and then I go from bullet points to that. So I spent probably, yeah, I'm not just sitting, I don't track my time. I always keep saying like I wish I tracked my time to know how long I would do, but whenever I do start tracking my time, I just leave the thing going, and then I forget the next time to actually start it, so it doesn't work for me. But yeah, it's been a couple weeks at least just planning it out and making sure that I have everything. Then there'd be, okay, now I have to have what projects we're working on to reinforce what we're learning. So you're sort of going through all the material, building everything out, making sure that it works with the lessons that you had planned before that. I'd build something out, realize that, oh, I didn't even talk about this. So then you're modifying the lesson plan more. And the one suggestion I would have if anybody ever wants to do something big like that is just make sure you have the entire thing ready to go, so you can sit down in the least amount of sittings to do all the recording, and batch recording and then batch editing. I wouldn't record the entire thing in one shot, because you never know if you make mistakes or something, but like I would usually...
Your microphone's off and you'll be...
Oh yeah, exactly.
No, I'm saying...
Yeah.
No, there you go, the panic. You end up recording the whole thing, microphone off, going,
yeah.
So it's just your screen as you code.
Yeah. And I've definitely done that for individual videos in the past, so having done that for something long would be heartbreaking. So when I had this, I've done two courses somewhat recently, I guess. So one of them was a really big course. That one I would do like a day of recording pretty much, and then a day of editing, a day of recording, a day of editing, to try and get through it. Especially for me, like I don't mind editing a YouTube video. I actually kind of like going through it. I listen, like I go at 2x speed, so it goes fast. It's not the end of the world. When I'm doing a day of editing and just going, especially course material tends to be a little drier, especially if it's like theory parts or you're going over all of that. Like it's mind numbing at one point. So if I tried to do more than that, I would just give up. But yeah, it just takes a long time to put together. The last course I did was a shorter one. I think it's about 4 hours long. So I had most of that recorded in like 2 days, which made it, my main thing would be if you're ever going to do something, start small. Like my first 3 courses were all 15 hours or something. I would definitely start small and then build up the skills, see what you're doing wrong, instead of doing what I did, which was the wrong way around. I was learning my mistakes by working on the big stuff, which it probably would have made sense to do it the other way around.
I think that's a habit of a lot of people who get really good at what they do is they constantly bite off more than they can chew. And
yeah,
then you have to work backwards from that as well. And just for everyone that's listening as well, because I see some questions about like the learning path, because I have titled this as Learning CSS in 2021 as well. We are going to get to it. I have a Notion here as well that I was showing Kevin beforehand. So it'll actually suit. I didn't actually know that's how you planned your courses. So I think it will probably suit when we do get into it of like what order you think these things could come as well. For somebody new coming into it, what's the right way to learn it? Or I guess a suggested way. There's no right way. Baptism by fire is usually the best way, in my opinion. But we'll jump into that shortly. So, like, if it was like a couple days, then just recording, and then 2 weeks of planning. So does that mean like you got it out in less than a month, or did you like plan a lead up to like a launch then, which is a whole other project as well, I'm sure, to actually make sure people see this course when it comes out?
Yeah. So again, I learned from my mistakes as I've been doing it all. So the last one I did, which was the shorter course, that one went really well in terms of I planned it all out. Then I recorded and edited. While I was doing that, I was like letting people know in my newsletter and on Twitter that I was working on this course. And then pretty much once I was finished with it and it was all uploaded, then I got into the whole sales sequence and stuff. I'd already been working on it a bit, but actually sending it out. I've made mistakes on the previous one where I'd set a launch date before I was finished the course. And I did that with Scrimba's course too, and then you're just working with like a gun to your head by the end, where you just have to do it because you said it. I did delay it once actually. I gave a release date, and then I was just like, it's either going to be a terrible product or I'm delaying it. So I said I'm going to delay it because the last thing I'm going to do is put out something that's not good quality. So I did delay it one of my courses one time, but in general, just like as you said, I tend to bite off more than I can chew, and even though I've done 4 courses or something now, plus if you go on my courses page, there's a few on there that are free courses too. So like
I've linked them all below as well
okay.
in the video. So if anyone's interested in actually learning some in-depth some CSS details, definitely check out the courses below as well. Because I was checking them out, and that's why I was amazed because I honestly had thought you had only started as well at the courses just over a year ago or that. So,
right.
But it's interesting. SAS is what a great one to start on as well. And I'm guessing is it through kind of working with SAS and that you decided, you know what, I really like doing CSS because I know so many people hate CSS with a passion because of all the rules, and it doesn't work like programming a lot of the times.
Yes.
And I'm a big advocate for just learn it. Like as in like that's the only way to enjoy CSS is to learn the rules, and then once you learn the rules, you can actually play with it and enjoy it. But until you learn the rules, it's just like things are happening randomly for many, many reasons.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I come from a design background, so I think CSS always spoke to me more than any other language, just because I wish, it's one of my favorite quotes, and I don't even remember, I'm going to misquote it, but it's from an article and I can't remember the author, which really bugs me, and I haven't been able to find it because I can't remember the exact wording. But it was just talking about how CSS is like the language for designers type of thing. And so for me, it was, I mean, there's weird things with it 100%. And I went through my own trials and tribulations while I was going through it all. But I think just because I had that sort of and I like making things look pretty, I guess. So like that CSS is what you do to do that. So I think that's why I was more
Yeah.
drawn to CSS. And then just after having used it forever, basically, like I started making websites in high school. So that was the late 90s when CSS was just becoming a thing pretty much. So I sort of grew up with it. So just by having always been, and I wasn't constantly doing it all the time. I had long, like year-long, 2-year-long breaks where I wouldn't make it because it was a hobby.
Yeah.
But just having always sort of done that side of things, that it, I guess I got less frustrated with it than a lot of people might have over time.
It makes sense. And then, so what was your career path then to now? And it just sounds like that's an interview,
Yeah,
nearly, isn't it? It's
that's
like,
right.
so Kevin, why do you want a job? No, it's just an interesting. I just find it really interesting how people kind of evolve into these things, especially when people like pick up and drop things. I know for myself, I had built websites for bands and things, but I didn't realize you could get paid for building websites. So I never thought it was an actual job
Right.
until like much more recently. And so that's why I'm very interested in your like career path that led to the madness that you're in now.
Yeah. I mean, I've taken, I never knew what I wanted to do with my life pretty much ever. So like the fact that I'm here now, it's kind of strange that I finally figured it out. And it's probably, even though I never knew what I wanted to do, I never would have imagined what I'm doing now. But I started, I mean, once I'd already had a degree in film and a bachelor's in urban planning, I went back to school again to get a degree in graphic design. Luckily, my
So
wife
that's the
had,
design background.
yeah, exactly.
So that
And
makes sense.
at the me and my wife had just we met in university, and then when we finished, she got hired right away. She's an elementary school teacher, and then I had my BA in urban planning, which I didn't want to have anything to do with. I don't even know why I enrolled there, but whatever. And then I needed to figure out something to do. I was working manual labor jobs, and my wife was just like, "You need to do something. Like, you're smarter than this. Like, figure something out." So I found a program that was only 18 months long, and being in Canada, the government subsidizes it. So it seemed like a pretty good idea in that it was short, and I was interested in it. So I did that. I got hired where I did my internship, and I was working there, and it was a really amazing job in the sense that it was a really small company I was working at. So there was me, two other designers, and the boss, and that was it. And so I right away was like put into big projects. I was working one-on-one with the clients. He was bringing me to like meet all the clients and stuff like that. I was seeing the business side of things
Excellent.
as well. So like from a
Amazing.
learning, yeah, from a learning standpoint, it was the best thing that could have happened. But the pay was insanely bad. And I kept justifying it in that like, oh, it's okay because I'm learning so much by being here. But then I couldn't, like, it wasn't enough, especially after like my wife had been supporting us by herself for so long. So I started doing freelance work on the side too, doing like UI design. And as I said, I'd been making websites since high school basically. So I said, well, if somebody's hiring me and paying me to do the design of their site, maybe I could charge them more, and I could make the site for them too once they approve the design. So I started freelancing and doing that side of things. I was mostly doing like WordPress trial themes, stripping out the CSS basically and just rebuilding the theme to look the way that my design had. So I did that for a while, and it was just hard because, again, I was working at night, I was working during the day, wasn't seeing my wife a lot. We'd had our first kid. And then the school that I went to for design phoned me up and asked if I'd be interested to do an interview to be a teacher. And so that was cool. And I thought about it for not very long and decided why not. So I jumped on that, not realize. Well, I sort of knew how much work it was because my wife was a teacher. So I started doing that, and it was a design school, but because they found out I had web experience, and the government like 2 months earlier had changed the curriculum for the program and added some web modules, but all of the teachers that had been there for like 10 years had been teaching just design and didn't know anything about making websites. So there was basically me, one other teacher that were actually teaching like front end side of things. And that's sort of what got me started into the teaching world, and also sort of why I started the YouTube channel too.
Amazing. Very natural progression. I always tell people to kind of, if you really want to advance your career fast, to get into a place where you can be near the top of the business. Although yes, sometimes at least you being, to put it politely, shafted, because you have to take a lot of, some people end up being assistants nearly to people to get used to the top of a business and everything else. But like, if you can do it in a way that you're actually using your skills and everything else, like, it's obviously set you on your way. And even I'm sure how you sell your courses now and how you think about the business side of things now, and the potential of running something, even a small operation, as an actual business rather than just a hobby. And you've done it successfully because you're now full-time doing this. So when did you stop teaching and change to this, or was there another thing in the middle?
No, so yeah, I was teaching, and then as I was teaching, I was doing less and less freelance just because it was too much work. And then that's sort of why I had time to actually start a YouTube channel at one point. And then I always saw it as a hobby, especially, I said at the beginning, there was no traction. Eventually there was some traction on the channel, but I still just saw it as a sort of like a side income, which was amazing. And for me, I would have been happy with that. But then it would have been after my first course, when people actually bought stuff from me, I was sort of blown away by that. And I sort of got this little thing saying like, maybe, but like the numbers weren't even anywhere. I was probably making $20 a month or something off of YouTube at the time. So it wasn't, but it was just this little thought. And then I made the Scrimba course, and that went really well. And then that sort of itch came back a little bit. And so I'd be thinking about it every now and then, but looking at the numbers, it just didn't make sense. And I'd resign myself. No, it's not going to happen. We're just going to keep on going. It's a nice side income. We can pay for a vacation every year or something like that. That'd be great. And then it was pretty much when the pandemic hit, I was teaching from home full time, which let me make my next course, so just because I actually had the time, I was at home, I was doing my lessons, but I was commuting like almost 2 hours every day. So that saved a lot of time. And then just being in front of my computer all the time, it made it a bit easier that I could do, extra stuff on the side. So I made that course, and that one, I made probably 10 months of income off of that launch. And it was at that point I said, you know what? If I can make a course that gives me 10 months of income off of one course launch, then I could probably, and I'm doing this part-time, what could I do if I'm doing it full-time? So that was sort of when I had that realization, and it was in a good enough spot with everything else that was going on. And the online teaching thing was a pain in the ass. For that, like, I'm comfortable doing online teaching. I've been doing, between my courses and all of that, but like the actual way it was being done at the school through the online stuff, I found it a big struggle, and the students were struggling with the style and the content type that we had to be covering. So to take that headache away and just be able to focus on the other side of things seemed like a pretty good idea.
Yeah, it makes sense. I don't know if you want to get in it, but we were talking about it before, and you did it in the most ridiculous fashion as well, doing the switch over with timing and everything. You really went through, just said, here is the worst time in my life to take all of these massive changes. I don't know if you want to talk about that, or we'll ignore it.
That's fine.
Yeah, please, fire ahead.
Yeah,
fill people in.
It was pretty much exactly around the time when me and my wife were putting an offer in on for our first house, or getting our first mortgage. So we're looking at sort of the financial burden of that. And I was looking at it even when we're working with the bank, and I'm like, we have to get this in now, because I need the bank to approve this offer while I'm still employed, because once that employment ends, there's no way they're taking some YouTuber guy. So I'm like, get it in, get it approved, and then like tomorrow I can give in my 2 weeks or whatever, but I need this approved. Like, so it was, and then looking at it going, well, is it the best idea to be getting a mortgage and leaving your job within a short period of time? Maybe not, but it's worked out so far.
Yeah, because I think we started chatting around that kind of period as well.
Yeah.
I think that's when we crossed paths originally. So it was just very interesting. That really stood out to me with you. I was like, this guy is crazy in the best possible way, because anyone that knows me will know I love talking to crazy people, and people who are crazy about what they do, though. It's a madness with some method to it,
Yeah.
So it's really cool to see it and see it be so successful. And like I said at the start of the stream, like just being able to pop onto a stream of yours and seeing like 600. Well, like what was the peak of that? Was it 700 at one point, or
no, probably 650 or so. I don't remember the exact, but yeah.
because I was just blown away. It just like you're just building things, and like so many people are interested, and it's really nice. I love that community side of things. For anyone, because I'm sure there's a lot of people from your channel that actually popped into this and wouldn't know myself. Like the one thing I love is the community aspect to everything. Is just the way like when you go to like a tech conference or something like that, you don't know the person or anything about them or where they've been or what they've done, but immediately you have something to click and talk about. So there's no awkward conversations. It's like, let's abuse whatever framework isn't on the screen. That's the that's the easiest way to make best friends with whoever is watching. How about that other framework? That sucks. There's something really innocent and nice about that kind of friendship building. It's nearly like when you're a child and you're just like, I like dinosaurs and I also like dinosaurs. Now we're best friends. So yes, I just like how easy it is to get some people who, without that kind of common ground, would never speak or just never have that clash. And again, I think it's why it's so important. It's such a great equalizer to society to a certain extent if we can get everyone doing this kind of thing, because like it's just like a common ground. So you can forget about the noise. Anyone that's been on Twitter that knows there's lots of noise about different topics and things. But then if you're just talking about, like, you can literally just tweet JavaScript and you'll get like 1,000 likes. It's amazing. That's what I mean. It's just something so pure about that nonsense that I love. Let me see. I see loads of questions came in. I didn't realize we're already a half hour deep. The time is flying. Really enjoying the conversation as well so far, Kevin. It's very interesting. I didn't know you could do a course that quickly. So you have efficiently pulled it down to an actual bite-sized or achievable thing to output. Are you going to do any more coming up soon, or do you have one planned? Do you want to give an exact date when it's going to be released so you have to go into your head or anything?
My SAS, I have to completely redo my SAS course. As I said, I was wanting to re-release it, and then the Scrimba thing happened, and then I got distracted with other ideas. And part of that was actually because they released Dart SAS and added new things, and it changed a lot with how SAS works. And it pretty much means that the content in the old course is good, but there's like large chunks of it that are obsolete. So it just, for me, and at this point, like I wouldn't want to make new content now and then have the old stuff there to like fill in the blanks, just because it would be kind of weird. And like I've evolved as a developer in the last 4 years or 3 years since I made it. So like, I think just ripping it down and starting over again makes the most sense. The advantage with that is the planning is done. I'm going to follow the same outline, throw in all the new stuff, and then so that side of things will be much faster. Or it's already done. So that side of things was a lot faster. Now I just need to actually record it all, which still takes some time because it's a pretty big course.
Of course, yeah, it's a powerful tool. Like, and as always with these things, there's always like, oh, and one more thing.
Yeah.
Like, where do you stop? Because you can do an infinite amount of things with it as well.
Yeah, I'm terrible at that because I always have. The last one I did that was a 4-hour course, my plan was 2 hours. I wanted, like, the challenge to me was let's make something small, because for me it's so easy just to have the scope creep on these types of things. So my 2-hour one turned into 4 hours, and that was just talking about, like, it's just Flexbox and nothing else. And I still managed to talk for 4 hours on it. So like, people always ask me, like, how can you just make CSS content or primarily CSS content? And are like, aren't you going to run out of topics or ideas? And between just there always seeming to be something else to talk about, and CSS happens, like, there's a lot of cool stuff coming to CSS. Like, I don't see any issues on needing new content in anytime soon.
Yeah, and the great part is, if you decide it's not for you anymore, guess what? You've learned how to learn. You can just change what you do. Mm-hmm. And it's a nice thing about learning to learn more than anything is you don't have to And that doesn't just mean that's all you can do either. It's like, okay, I don't like this anymore. Let's do like documentaries on cats instead, because that's now what I want to do. I've amassed a cat collection where this is my new niche. So I see a mutual friend of ours, Matt, has jumped in from front end mentor. Matt has just jumped in as well, and I see Johnny O'Sullivan has jumped in and said, "Tuning in late, so Scrimba is out of date now?" Question mark.
No, the Scrimba course I think is still the good thing with the Scrimba course when I made that one. I was really just focused on the fundamentals of CSS, so like I wasn't going into nothing in there would become out of date. Like if you go through that one, it's I had a Sass course before that one, and the Sass, they changed they went from Ruby to Dart as the language that it's run on, and then when they made
they've changed it. I didn't even know they changed it.
They changed it. We were talking off stream before about the developer relations and all that. Sass could really use someone in that because they changed it like 3 years ago, and nobody knows about it.
I genuinely had no idea, and I love Sass. But again, because I learned it about 5 years ago, I just never really, went to look back. I just kind of look at the docs and say,
exactly,
it works, because of all the frameworks. You just say like add an end file now, and now Sass works, so it's fine.
Yeah, but with that change, they had ideas for certain things that they've been implementing. So there's new ways of doing some of the old stuff. They've deprecated import, and now they have an @use and an @forward that replace that a little bit, which nobody knows about. And then so there's all these new things that have changed in it that just nobody's aware of. So that was a pretty.
I hope
change.
none of the developers I'm teaching at work are watching this now, because I was just showing them how to use that import like last week. I'm like, yeah, you just import this and it's fine.
Yeah, it still works for now, but at one point they're going to deprecate it. Well, it's been deprecated, but it's still working. I don't know what version they're actually going to drop it completely from.
Nice. That's interesting, because I genuinely was teaching this last week to people. I was like, yeah, you just import it. And it was just two people who didn't know Sass at all, so it's still magical. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's I need to go and do my homework after. So hurry up and get this course out, Kevin, so I can. I can relearn it.
I do have a video that looks just at the new syntax there, because that's probably the biggest change. Some of the other things are more just like some little syntax, like so instead of doing it this way, switch this. The new use and forward thing's actually a different approach. So it's a lot of people.
If you can send that over to me like on Discord after or whatever else, what I want to do is I want to link that in the video as well, because I'm sure everyone will want to see that then as well. Sure. Because
cool.
That's mind blowing to me. But that just shows you, like, I would class myself as a senior developer and know my way around CSS and Sass and these things, and I genuinely just didn't know.
So nobody knows. Don't feel bad at all.
Yeah. There's too many things I don't know, so I don't feel guilty about not knowing things anymore. When you get a certain stage, you're just like, correct, I did not know.
Yeah. I think that's a very important skill to have, is to be able to admit you don't know something, though.
Yeah. Many a time, I don't know if you know, when I started my first job, Kevin, I kind of bluffed my way into like a mid-level job, first job, straight away. Lied about some of my experience, got into the job, and really had no idea what I was doing or whatever else. And when I was in the job, my first week in the job, they had a meeting and they were like, hey, we need somebody to go fix this problem in Australia, which is the other side of the world for me anyway. I said, oh, I would go, but I'm new. And they're like, oh, no, you can go. You have the experience. So I remember learning a framework called Reactive on the plane to Australia, because that's the framework they wanted me to know when I got there. I landed, got to the job or whatever else, and it was actually a framework called Reactive. It dropped the E. So I had gotten in because I knew React. I was one of the very early adopters of React. I was doing freelancing before that. And then I had learned Reactive on the plane, and then when I got there, it was actually Reactive. But because I didn't ask about like what is this framework, I just went, oh yeah, I know reactive. And I was just like panicked and learning it. It was actually a totally different framework. So in the space of the week, I had to learn 2 frameworks. But yeah, that taught me to just say you don't know something. It's way easier in the long term. It'll bruise your ego in the short term, but at least it was just it could have been a very embarrassing thing. Again, it's one of those cases I like to bite off more than I can chew, as well. And yeah, that was one of those. That was really the starting point of that. And then that really gave me an inflated ego for a while, because I was like, I'll just say yes to everything because I just get flowing around the place now. This is what I do. But as you can imagine, it took a few massive fuck ups before I kind of came back and realized, maybe it's not such a good idea. Let's see, what do I have here? Cheers for that. It was great for you. There you go. Thank you, Johnny. No, that's all right. It makes sense. It's a good question, in fairness, because we were talking about like what was out of date, and I think you might have missed that we were talking about it was actually the first course you ever made, not the Scrimba course. And then, will you save this live or will it be removed? I will save it for sure for a while anyway. Potentially we'll cut it up into like the 2 halves here, because this first half has really been me just grilling Kevin for whatever interview he's doing now. So I will probably cut maybe into 2 halves. So people who are more interested in kind of a CSS learning path and listen to us converse about that will be able to find it a little bit easier. I might just timestamp it either. We'll see whatever. Let me see. As I'm on a roll. There you go, Johnny. Again, as I'm on a roll. Can people learn to love coding? This is like, I'm a robot. Can I learn to love? That's a really interesting question, though. What would be your thoughts on, if you dislike it early on, do you think it's something that you can learn to love eventually, or?
I think it depends maybe on why you dislike it. I do know like a lot of people find my channel that hate CSS specifically, and not always, but a lot of the time I can help them sort of at least appreciate it, if not, fall in love with it. So I think that like if it's something, I guess, I think some people it's not for them. They just won't find the interest in it. But I think if it's something that you're getting frustrated by, and it's something you're interested in, but it just seems like you're constantly battling it, then definitely I think once the little things start clicking and you start understanding how it's working, then I think you can definitely start enjoying it a lot.
Yeah, that goes down kind of those fundamentals stuff more than anything, because it's like anything. Like if you were cooking and you didn't know what flavors were in the ingredients, and you were just like, make something nice here.
Yeah.
And you have like salt and sugar, but you don't know what either of them are or anything. So you just start grabbing and going, tastes wrong. Let's add something else. Tastes wrong. You're never going to really be able to take some decisions to make something tasty, I guess. You're going to have to really learn those basic things. And I think for me anyway, I don't think anyone is inherently like, we're humans. We were never, I don't think, designed to interface with computers as much as we do now. So the fact that we love doing this is definitely not natural, to say the least, I think. And I think a certain amount of love for things comes out of mastery, where there's a comfort in doing it because you know how to solve the problem. You're like, and it's like that little bit of a rush. You go, I'm an idiot, I'm an idiot, I'm an idiot. And then you solve it and you're like, yes, I'm a genius.
Yeah, you definitely get those hits of dopamine or something when things actually work properly, and you get it's a good feeling.
Yeah, exactly. And like again, here's Aaron Delaney saying, I'd rather play with CSS than JavaScript. And this is the fun part. Like, is I'm a huge JavaScript fan, but like I love CSS because I think a nicely styled app can hide so much BS that's going on behind the scenes. They don't have to know how moronic some of my decisions were in the actual making of things, because you can do little fancy things to give the perceived loading time or perceived requests and things are much nicer to the user. So you can get away with some optimizations that just aren't there. So I'm a huge fan for, especially even just enterprise applications and things. You can, by just having a good understanding of CSS, it can really change the whole feeling of an application. Yeah, so loads of things. I think actually there's a great one for you. Kevin, your setup is sick. It is a phenomenal setup, in fairness. Did you get the lights changed since the last time I was seeing you, or?
It's a new lens, which makes a world of a difference on the camera. So it's actually, I think the last time we talked, I was probably using my old webcam. So that is the difference between going from a webcam to a DSLR as your webcam, and then having it also with a really good lens. That makes such a big difference.
Excellent. And this must be, let's go through a couple of these and then we'll jump into trying to design a learning path for people. Is it important to learn advanced CSS or learn basics and move on to JS framework and then learn advanced CSS? Interesting. And since I have you on the trigger, I might as well say, Kevin, what is it? And then I'll say, yes, I totally agree. That's the smart answer. Let me keep that on the screen as well.
I mean, for me, buy all my courses and learn CSS really well. It's the best thing you should do. But no,
of course.
Yeah, I think it's important. I mean, it depends a little bit what you want to be doing and stuff, but I do think it's important to get into JavaScript, not wait too long to get into JavaScript. Just because at one point, like, you're going to need it for stuff, and you'll be manipulating your CSS or classes or whatever using JavaScript and all of that. So like, if you're learning each one completely in isolation, I don't think it's realistic necessarily. I also think, especially with CSS, the nice thing with it is, like, if you're able to make a layout, it doesn't have to be a beautiful layout, but if you're able to make a layout, then it's easy to, like, oh, I want to make my layout look a little better with this one thing. And you could learn that one thing and just sort of add it in there pretty easily. You learn a property with a few values. Some things are more difficult than others. Like when you start getting responsive layouts, or if you want to learn just grid, there's so many properties and values that you sort of need to learn for some of the things. But I think it's an easy thing to just add one thing to your arsenal at a time. So for me, it makes sense once if you feel comfortable just with the syntax of it, the fundamentals of it, I don't think there's a reason to wait to start getting into JavaScript.
Yeah, I also think what a lot of people don't do quickly enough as well on this is just build things, because that kind of informs what you should be learning. And that's why I know Matt was here earlier, I don't know if he's still here as well, but the front-end mentor challenges as well, because it's like, you think you know something from following along videos. Like if you're following along my videos or Kevin's videos or anything else, you're like, oh, I know this thing. And then as soon as it just leaves your mind as soon as you leave that video. So the only way to kind of learn these things is through practice. So like picking up something and building something with those concepts before you move on to the next thing is always useful. But again, JavaScript and CSS are so tightly linked. Like it's for style things that you end up using JavaScript anyway. So you'll end up learning more CSS as you learn JavaScript and vice versa. Because you just need both of them.
Yeah, when I was learning JavaScript, that was the big mistake I made. And I don't know why I did it, because when I learned CSS, like I learned most of it just by building stuff. And at the time too, we didn't, like, the YouTube videos I didn't have as a thing. Books, I never liked learning that type of stuff from books. I have a couple, but I was just mostly building stuff. And then when I sat down to do JavaScript, I did the exact opposite. And I was just like trying to learn it from like, almost like a computer science standpoint. And I was like, well, I get how this works, but why would I ever, how does that apply to me making a website? And I couldn't make that connection. And instead of trying to use it to build stuff, I just would just be frustrated. And I got really frustrated with JavaScript for a while. And then I finally had that moment where I'm like, I'm building stuff and it's like, oh, I need to use JavaScript for this. Let's figure out how I can do that. And then I'd learn that. And then oh, that's why I learned that thing before. And you make that connection, like building things is the only way to learn. And it's funny coming from my background how I didn't realize that until after the fact, but I got there eventually.
But I think that's something everybody is guilty of.
Oh, for sure.
Like I have not met one person who is not guilty of that. So learn from literally everyone's mistakes. You're going to make a mistake as well, but like build things before you think you're ready to build things as well. I think that's the sentiment there, because a lot of people, I even see it, my partner's going through a local coding bootcamp here at the moment and called Code Institute. And they've been really great because she's making some very tangible things coming out of it, like and looking at videos like Anya's JavaScript games. Mm-hmm. She made like a Candy Crush clone or a puppy dash, I think she called it. So we have little puppy animations and things in it. And that that's exciting then when you start building things and seeing how you alter things to make them your own and actually take your own creative input. And it's not so rigid and boring really, because like it can be just a bit tedious if you're like, okay, I've learned this thing. When can I build a thing? When do I see the value in my skills? Mm-hmm. But like that was her second project in that course. And I know after 6 months of coding, there's no way I would have been able to build that. But the fact is, she just threw herself at a smaller problem. Yeah. And then was like, well, maybe I'll just add one more thing. And those little one more things that you get when you're building things, that's what makes you a good developer, really. Mm-hmm. Jeff B, nice to see you, Kevin. CSS is a gem. We have here Sabrina is saying busy trying to figure out PHP for class, but I love your CSS. I started on PHP as well, so I'm similar as well for WordPress and things from all the band sites and everything else. We were dancing and it was really dark. You know, we both mistook other people in the room. Yeah, you can just use your imagination on that one. I'd rather a bit of mystery there. No, maybe there's a secret YouTuber island where all of us developers go. The nerdiest island ever. I'm doing a course doing JavaScript now. Oh, excellent. So you're doing a course with a crowd in Ireland. What course, or who is that you're doing that with? That's interesting. I love knowing who's teaching in Ireland as well. That is not the way tech school works. I'm guessing that's the way we're talking about things. And I think anyone that likes pretty things has had this feeling as well.
Yes.
But anyone who doesn't like pretty things and wants to see the programming is like, I hate the front end because it's just so obnoxious to play with CSS. Look at all these. Jeff B is an absolute, loves your stuff anyway.
Thanks.
There you go. Going through some of these here. What about PHP? I loved PHP. I was actually working on a bit of PHP this week for the first time in 3 years. Because I got a project that was running on PHP. Lucky enough, there was a guy that I work with that's much more competent in PHP than me now. So he was a great asset to kind of make me actually be able to do anything with it. I think a lot of unwanted, unneeded hate in PHP again, but again, it just depends what you're looking at.
It's not the sexy language anymore, just because all these other things have come around, but it's still, I think, just with WordPress alone, it powers probably most of the internet, but I think it's still an important one.
CSS is magical. Couldn't afford the Code Institute. Code Institute are great. Actually, just so you know, as a side note on the expense of this, I did a talk with Code Institute. They're probably the biggest providers here for kind of boot camp. But check out the Springboard because they offer free places to a number of people every few months as well. So definitely go there. Is it viable? Oh, an actual question here as well. I thought they were all. I was just clicking through. I was expecting more compliments for Kevin here. I was expecting the head was going to go expand out of shot. Is it viable to VW or VH for font sizes to avoid rewrite? Oh, this is a fun one for rewriting a lot of media queries. You've done a good few videos on font sizes and things as well, haven't you? So I have definitely never tried to use VHs or especially VWs as well for font sizes. I have never even heard of that as a tactic. So what do you think, Kevin? Would you use VHs and VWs? I kind of know your answer already, but...
Yeah, it's really frowned upon in general, mostly because of accessibility reasons. There's a few other reasons too. So the accessibility one is if you change the font size of the browser any way whatsoever, it won't change. So whether it's in the browser settings or even if you just like Control plus or minus to zoom in and out, because it's linked to the viewport size, it doesn't change. So from that side of things, it's pretty bad. And even like I go to websites and have them like I have glasses now, I'm getting old and I'm not that old, and I'll zoom in on stuff. So in general for that, it's not the best. And it can, if you have some that are set with viewports and some that aren't, it's kind of awkward on that. But there's also, if it's completely linked to the viewport, it just gets either extremely big at big viewport sizes or insanely, like it'd be like 2 pixels big at really on a phone. So it's hard to find the middle ground. That said, we do have clamp now. So with clamp, you can set a minimum and a maximum font size and then have the ideal width in the middle. So that means you can have it grow and shrink, but it reaches a minimum and maximum. So in those cases, you could. The one thing I would suggest is clamp's part of like one of the new CSS functions. So you can do math inside of it, like you could do a calc. So you could set a like minimum 2 rem, maximum 6 rem, and then in the middle do a 1 rem plus say 2 VW or 5 VW. And that way to grow and shrink with, if somebody pluses and minuses, it's still going to have that accessibility side of things, and you've set a minimum and maximum size. So if you don't mind setting it up that way, you can go for it. The only issue is if you want that for your entire like all the typography on your site, it's super hard to get them to go at the right scaling, because like small fonts, you probably want them to scale differently than larger fonts, where usually you can scale them up and down more. So I've done stuff like that, and I still do for really big titles, but for all my other text, I just use media queries, and I usually just have one breakpoint for my font sizes. And I also do all my font sizes now inside using custom properties. So you can redefine all your font sizes inside one media query just by redefining the custom properties, and then everything adjusts pretty easily.
Yeah, I've started recently. Jay had converted me, because after seeing some of his wizardry with the CSS variables and like changing things at runtime as well, that converted me to using like a lot of those CSS variables and things, and being able to just change things in one place. I think that's much more powerful and a lot less messy, because it's easier to read these things, because you can just have like one file with that updates for sizes, and it doesn't become complicated. Yeah. Because I think even the clamp with the VWV, VH, and then you're calculating the pixels, and then you're going to change it everywhere as well. It just sounds like it would probably be easier to write media queries at that stage then anyway. Unless you just like a specific use case for it. And that's just me being lazy, I guess. But you know, I always go for a lazy solution. Jeff, if you must be new here for my streams anyway, but on Fridays I always have a beer, and I always encourage everyone to join in. If you drink beer or have a coffee or something, whatever your poison of choice is, mine is definitely a beer on a Friday evening. So definitely. Let's see. Tips to learn CSS animations. I think I will jump into this actually in a couple of minutes, because I want to get into the learning path now, because we're after talking for so long already on different things. And that is in my list of things to talk to. Let's see. Is there any other things here we should hit off before we jump in? Oh, well, this is actually funny. Kevin in his element explaining CSS. Uh, do you guys use SAS at all? I think there we go. We must Sabrina, you must have missed the start of this. Kevin is in the middle of. Have you started the new update yet? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so you should definitely learn it, and Kevin's going to have a new course soon, which is going to be excellent. It's phenomenal for large projects. It's like if you do that. Do you use any linters? Actually, fun side question. Do you use any? Like I found my perfect kind of way of sorting out code bases, because one thing I go into when I go into like a new project, the one thing that's always horrible is the CSS. It's always just a nightmare. So the one thing I always set into place is I set up style lint, and I set up like just a rule, like a soft rule for PRs to say, do not have more than 2 layers of nesting. So we use BEM and ITCSS, kind of a hybrid approach. So I'm wondering, do you have any particular like sanity checks or rules that you use to kind of make sure it's clean? Because like I've gone as bad as making sure in Stylent that things are alphabetical.
Oh, I don't like that.
I love it, and the reason is because a lot of people have like padding, and then they'll have padding bottom, and there's often a load of duplicate properties that people miss, and it often causes unseen cascading effects because they're just like trying to get things to work.
Yeah.
So I would never use alphabetical order if I was working by myself.
Right.
But with a team of people, I think it catches so many little mistakes that people can commonly make. Definitely give it a shot. I'm telling you, there's a video for you to try after as well, because it's been one of the cleanest ways to do things, and every developer hates me for about 4 weeks, I would say, until they're using a project that doesn't do it, and then they start seeing the ugly code come in. So it's one of those things that it's like, you'll thank me later, like an angry old dad. But yeah, do you have any sanity tools, or what would you do to keep code bases clean?
I mean, what you said, style lint's great, and I do think with nesting, it's really important to keep it under control if it's a SAS-based project or any preprocessor. I know some people that don't even allow nesting, just because the ampersand and stuff like that can make it hard to search for stuff if you're working on a really big project. To me, I think to a certain extent it's fine. For me, the organization, I see how like the alphabetical, if you're on a project with a team where you're sort of enforcing it, it makes it easy to find stuff like that. I'm a very big proponent of just organizing it by its function. So like when you're talking about like having multiple paddings in there, like for me, it's usually display at the top, then like if you're changing it, then like padding, margin are together, all the typography is together. And like I get CSS can be annoying just because like even just looking at the text, you have like text or all the text something, then font something, then you have color which has nothing, which is really frustrating because I muck up on that. Then so just trying to keep all the typography stuff together, then whatever else. Just for me, like logical groupings of it, I find you can sort of get away from that same type of problem of having. And I've done it on my own when I'm like, if you watch one of my live streams sometimes where I'm just trying to get something to work, and then I go back up to where my margin and my other things were, and I start doing padding, and I'm like, why isn't it working? And it's because for some stupid reason I put it all the way at the bottom. So that one's winning. So yeah, definitely like you can get yourself into trouble, but I mean linting and stuff like that can help with that, right? So
yeah, I think it's one of those tools, like if you nail those things right, I think you can make huge impact in companies, because nobody likes doing this stuff.
Yeah.
And as a result, you will stand out and look very proficient very fast when you can sort out things like that, because I think it is by far, I've worked on front end, back end, or wherever, and always the messiest place is CSS, because there doesn't seem to be a defined standard, unlike other languages, on like how you organize this stuff. It's interesting. I think maybe that's a cheat sheet that needs to be drawn up or something, like how to code cleanly for for CSS because it's definitely the toughest thing when I started, when constantly losing things and then trying to get used to a messy CSS code base is nightmarish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even in one of my courses I did where we got pretty far into the weeds of CSS, but it was just a CSS course. We weren't using Sass, and even as I was recording the lessons, I'm like, how do I organize this? Just because I'm so used to Sass breaking everything into a partial, it makes life so much easier. I have this huge 700 line file, and I'm just like, where do I put this one now?
Yeah, and that's and when you're feeling that, imagine somebody that's coming in cold to it.
Yeah, for sure.
Like if you're struggling to put in things like other people are going to struggle to read these things, and I think that's that's the hard part about this as well. Is it like just be sound? I always say that. I don't know if you have that saying in Canada as well. So being sound is just being a nice person, being a decent person. Because like wouldn't you hate if it was landed on you in a mess? And it's funny enough, it's probably the biggest impact I've made. I always think of that Monty Python skit because I've gone into a few places and just fixed the CSS code base, and everyone's like, this guy should lead the whole team because of how clean things are now. I'm like, it's just I just fixed the CSS. But because it's something that nobody wants to touch or has any idea on how to fix it, it suddenly just elevates. Like, wow, if you could fix this, you can fix anything. So definitely something worth looking at. I really like this comment. Kevin's glasses is a container for his eyes, but have a wit in rem. With a border top. Right, I'm going to do 2 more of these, and then we're going to jump over. I'm going to share my screen, and we'll spend 20-30 minutes going through like what we think is a useful career path for people.
Sounds good.
Would you prefer to use an animation library over custom animations?
It depends what I'm trying to do and how, is it something that I could do pretty quickly, put together? And I guess it also depends what the end product is too. If it's a small project that I'm working on, and it's like a personal thing that I just want to ship, then I'll probably use an animation library. If it's going to be a bigger project where there's different things and it has to be integrated in different ways and it's worth building out my own, then I think it's definitely, and I mean, I say that if it's a small project I'm doing, then I would probably do it on myself as well, just because I enjoy doing that. But I think that, and it, I think it's like, is it worth your time to come up with something custom or not? And it also depends on like the problem with any library that you're bringing in. And I've seen, especially with animation ones, the quality of them can be very hit and miss. So if it's making sure you're getting a good one that's not actually impacting performance is super, super important. Because sometimes it can be animation, anything can be such a hit on performance. So bringing in the wrong library, you could just sink the performance of your product, which would be the worst. But yeah, I mean, I think it's right. It's always like a time versus cost versus value type of weighting.
My usual rule of thumb on these kind of things as well is go look at the library, and if it's something that you could like go into the GitHub and copy and paste over what you need, go do that, because at least you have control over it then. Mm-hmm. Obviously some of them are a little bit more complex. Like I've been using Framer a little bit lately and things like that, and it's a cool beast. There's no copy and pasting that thing over. But like for a lot of the CSS animation libraries, it's like, here are the keyframes and here are the classes. So it's something you could easily kind of copy and paste over. And it's good to get into the repos and take a look and see how people are doing these things. Even if you're not going to build it yourself, you should still take a peek under the hood and see how it's actually done for your own information.
Yeah, any tool you're using, try and understand what it's doing. I think that's really important.
I think there's too many people out there, and it just saying, "Oh, we just copy and paste," and like in reality, you'll do that quite a lot when you're early on. But what will elevate you is actually learning what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is the last one for a little while. Adrian's after asking a great question here as well, so I have to. Adrian used to run CSS Dublin, so I have to give him an honorable mention here as well. No, Nora has asked, is it worth making a table of contents at the top of a CSS file? I've gotten into the habit of doing this, but I almost never see it anywhere, so I'm assuming it's not. That is the most. You deserve a medal. First off, for one, for keeping your code that clean. What would you think, Kevin? Is it overkill, or is it the nicest thing I've ever seen?
I'm jealous of the ability to continue doing that. It's one of those things that I tell myself I should do more of, and then I just never do it because I'm just making the thing do its thing. And then, when you do find some like places where it is done, like even if it's you go back to one of your own things, even if it's a personal project, if you did that and you open that file a year later, you're going to be so happy. So like if you're already doing that, don't stop. That's such a good thing to do.
That's an amazing thing. Like that's you should Nora, you need to start making that the norm, because that is very cool. I really like that. You could I want to see you could make nearly a VS Code extension that automatically templates the documentation for your CSS, saying, "Hey, fill out these things." Nearly like a pull request template. Interesting. That's a very cool one. And this one is just because I love flame wars on these kind of things. If you had to use one of them, would you choose Bootstrap or Tailwind? I'm opinionated on this, but I want to hear your opinion first.
Do I have to pick one?
Well, you have to pick one, and then you're going to defend both of them, I guess, somehow.
If someone put a gun to my head, I guess today I would use Tailwind. I'm not 100% behind everything it does, and I get a little bit annoyed writing it, but I've used it to be able to have an opinion on it is basically what I did, because everyone was asking me about it, and I'm like, I can't answer if I haven't used it. But I don't have enough experience with it to have like a really there's a few things that I didn't like about it that people have told me, no, there's other, you're not using that properly type of thing. So I think that I think today I would use that just because I know that the CSS file I'm getting at the end of the day is going to be minuscule, and from a performance point of view, it's going to be great if you're doing it properly. They have the purge CSS and all of that through their workflow. So I think from that standpoint, I would probably go with Tailwind. Even if you use Bootstrap properly, like it's all set up with Sass, so if you're only importing the things that you need to import, you could still end up with a file that's not this giant clunky thing that most people end up with when they use Bootstrap. I learned Bootstrap when it was, I think I used it when it was version 3, I think was when I was using it, or when they made around 2.3, like that switch they made. I learned a lot about CSS by using it. Going back a little bit to what you were saying about like understanding how it's working. Like for me, when I was using it, I was reading so much in their documentation, seeing how back then it was like float based layouts. And I was looking at like, how are they making this work? And it made me understand so much more about how CSS was working, and also how I could approach making these types of things on my own. So I learned a ton from it, but I'm not sure if it's the best tool for the job anymore.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I personally like rolling my own CSS anyway, so I'd rather not use any. But I've had more success in creating performant sites with Tailwind.
Yeah,
which is the one reason I like Tailwind, is the performance for what you build is phenomenal. What you get with that very easily. Whereas, I think Bootstrap is probably better for somebody who doesn't enjoy writing CSS, because you get a lot of stuff that's just done. With Tailwind, you're still making the same conscious choices that you would make if you just rolled your own, in my opinion. All you're doing is accepting that they have certain sizes, because you would just be in your CSS file saying 24 pixels. Actually, no, 36 pixels. That's the difference with Tailwind, I think, is where you get a lot for free with Bootstrap. You're working for it with Tailwind. So I think it really depends on how much you like CSS or are working with it. Because that's the only reason I don't use Bootstrap all that much, is And maybe it's just because we've seen too much of it on the web, and we'll probably see the same with Tailwind now soon. You'll be able to tell a Tailwind site very quickly.
Yeah.
Because of the spacings and things are very generic. But I think it just became easy to spot for me, so it just turned me against it a little bit because I want something a little bit flasher.
Yeah.
Excellent. Right, there's still the questions. I think will come in forever, so I'm going to stop the questions for a moment, and if we have some time, depending on how we get through this, we will see. So I have a rough start here, Kevin, of my suggested learning path for CSS. These are headings, so we're going to go into kind of what should people focus on, because like I say language fundamentals as if that's just a thing. What are those fundamentals would you kind of reckon? I'm just kind of putting you on the spot as well. This is a brainstorm, so people in the chat want to actually throw in some suggestions into this as well, please do it. It will help us fill it out as well.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
What are some of those fundamentals you would say early on?
I'm just looking through the rest of the. I mean, for me, the syntax, I guess, is the most basic, and just understanding the idea. Like, I know there's different types of selectors, but just understanding that, like, how to select something, and then so you have the selector itself, then you have the value, and then you have the property, you have the colon, the semicolon, like all of that is obviously the very first thing that you want to figure out. I mean, I'd almost put selectors themselves as one of the fundamentals, and like just understand, or you know what, under the language fundamentals, after
maybe
syntax,
actually change this to pseudo.
Oh yeah, okay, perfect. Yeah,
because I think that makes more sense, because the selectors, because I know when I said selectors, I was thinking pseudo selectors.
Perfect.
Because I think like when you start using hover, I think that's a mind blowing moment when you start using that.
Yeah.
So like selectors, which would be like what ID, class. Would you go further than that kind of selecting early on, or do you think these are probably perfect?
Yeah, I think just the ID class and just like the regular element selector, I think are, you know, where you should be starting with and not worrying about.
Yeah, of course. I probably should put that first.
Yeah, you don't want to worry about like the, you know, nested selectors and like adjacent siblings and stuff like that. I think just knowing I can select something and make it work. I think then with that also comes specificity, which
I guess specificity. I know for myself anyway. This is what I knew we'd have some fun when we get into this. Is this something you learned straight away? Because I know I didn't, and it took a while to. It took a couple of failures before I learned it. But do you think it would be something that you should just learn quickly?
That's a good no. I think what's important, I guess, with the selectors is just knowing that a class will overwrite an element, and like an ID overwrites a class, which will overwrite an element if they're all selecting the same thing. So I don't think it necessarily, you don't need to know like exactly how specificity works, especially if you're not making nested selectors and things like that. But just knowing that there's like those three have a different value to them, I guess, is the most important thing. I'm trying to think like if I was starting a course, the very first thing, we're learning the syntax. You're looking at how you can choose different things on your page.
Because I'm expecting after I give you this sheet afterwards, you'll have a course out in like 3 days. You'll just be like, here is the whole beginner's guide to CSS.
I mean, in a way, also, I guess the first thing there that I'd also start looking at when it comes to actually styling things, like super early on, I'd just be probably focused on certain like properties. Like you can't learn everything. So I think like just understanding, I guess, a few of like the basic text, like, you know, you're changing your font, changing the color, and changing the font size, like little things, like very basics of just so, because, you know, that gets you, I mean, it goes sort of with the syntax, you're learning the syntax, but you want to be making those changes, right? So like different things you can actually use early on to start making some changes to stuff.
I've been told this is great advice. I say this as somebody that does not know a second language. Okay, so take this with like real grain of salt. But from listening to people like Tim Ferriss and things, that they always say the best way to learn a language is to figure out what you're going to use a lot. So I think that's what you look at. Like when you look at a page, the background colors, the font sizes, those sorts of things are things that will pop up. Actually, that's a great one. Comments.
Oh yes, comments is a very good one. Yes.
Because you're going to be taking a lot of notes and
Yeah.
commenting out things to test these things out. I think those would be a lot of the fundamentals. I'm going to move to pseudo selectors. Would you be opposed to me moving to pseudo selectors further down, or do you think they are next on the list?
No, I think inheritance and the cascade would be second. So yeah, pseudo selectors could be moved down.
Is there a way to move this? Let's move this. I can see pseudo selectors getting moved down a little bit, piece by piece here as well, but this is the fun part. So inheritance and cascade. What do we mean? Like if we were to expand on this. Oh yes, there we go. So there's another comment in there. Is this does this go under document flow or does it go under fundamentals? And that is different types of elements. Inline block, replaced elements.
Yeah, it makes sense to put that in document.
Where will we put sizing then as well? That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. Sizing would be box model.
Okay.
When it comes, I know for me, when I was teaching the very, very basics, early on, like I'd tell them that there's inline elements like links, but I wouldn't really teach them what an inline element was, other than it's not. So I guess like maybe in the language fundamentals, you could put like inline versus block, but like I don't think it's worth diving into like that you can change the display property super early on, because then you're worrying about things that probably aren't super important. But just the idea that like a paragraph, even if it's like 3 words in it, is going to force a new line. So that like in terms of that, I think is important. Like
so we assume you know. Yeah, I guess the assumption here is you know some HTML, so you know that like there is inline elements that you can use.
Yeah.
And then you can add some style. So if I use a span around something, I could add some styling to it to get a highlight, for instance.
So
I don't need to actually mess around with this stuff to do too many complicated things. Because I guess that could have thrown me off. But again, I guess if you know HTML, you should be able to use some.
Yes.
Even if you don't know what it actually is, you'd be able to use inline and block elements.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. With inheritance of the cascade, I think inheritance is one of like the things that people early on don't take advantage of. Just seeing like beginners where they're just redefining the font family on every single selector they're doing. And you're like, no, dude, just do it once at the top and you're fine. Like, declare it on the body and you're probably okay for most of your document. You change it where you need to. So inheritance for that. So just like understanding, I guess, what's inherited and what isn't inherited. And I always give the rule of thumb that if it's related to text, it's probably inherited, and if it's anything else, it's not. Because I don't want to get into like the weeds of it. I don't want to go into like, oh, except for form elements. Form elements don't inherit fonts because who knows why. I just want to say, like, if you declare a font family on the body, everything in there is going to inherit it. If you declare a color on like anything, your font size, whatever you do, all those font related things are being inherited. I think is the easiest way to think about it. And then sorry.
No, that makes sense. It's funny actually because I actually always forget it. That's actually something that always throws me, which is a great rule of thumb. So if anyone wants to like add a note here when you're listening, is the form element actually always throws me. Always. I don't know why I'm not able to make an actual mental memo of that. It will go again, and because of my thinking juice, I'll probably forget again. So, very interesting one actually on that one. And then cascading.
Yeah, so I think the most important thing to know about the cascade early on is just whatever comes last wins. If it's, if you declare padding 3 times on the same thing, like we were talking about, it's the last time you declare it that it's actually that one's gonna win. because again, I've even done it myself recently, and you even open up your dev tools and you see it's being crossed off, and you're like, why is it not working? And then you finally realize 10 minutes later that you have the same rule declared later on. But I see people do that all the time that are early on, that just the order has an impact, and it's always the last one that wins. Or you also get people early on, they forget that they even selected something, so they're selecting it again later in the document. And this is because like maybe for some reason they set font color or just color black, and then later in the document they're trying to change it, but they have the same selector again, and it's not working. So
I call that the waterfall effect. I don't know if
exactly.
that's a technical term, is it?
Yeah.
Or I always like it's just a way. It's the mental model I've built of how cascading works. You know, wherever is at the end. But yeah, definitely that's super important as well, because I think that caused most headaches. Actually, I'm going to put a note at the top of this. Something you shouldn't be doing, because I think people discover this. Oh. I would always tell people while they're learning, don't use important.
Yeah.
Because that will stop you from learning stuff properly. I'll figure out what section to put that in. Or maybe notes at the end. So, because I know early on, that's something that really stopped me from understanding things, because I was like, oh, this doesn't work, I'll just important it. And then that's it, fixed. And then you end up coming somewhere else and you go, oh, I need more important stuff.
Yeah. But it's funny because I find that and I think it's the best advice ever, is learning not to use importance to solve your problems. But it's one of those things that once you know what you're doing, that then you can bring it back into the game. Like people all of a sudden start shunning it, and they start creating these crazy selectors that boost specificity just so they can overwrite something else. And I'm like, if that's a utility class that has one job to change your font's color, and you want it to work every time, maybe that's a use case where you could use it. Just like, it's, there are times where I think important becomes okay, but people have been so shunned against it. But it is definitely a use for caution. But if you're learning, don't use it 100%. Just don't use it.
It is useful if you're using like third-party libraries and things you don't really have a full control or understanding of. Then I think there is a use case for it. But and Adrian puts it in nicely here. Adrian says, I'm here on the wrong screen. Adrian said, in my book, important is the nuclear option. And that's exactly it. It is the nuclear option. So going nuclear when you're learning is just like, will trick you into a false sense of security, I think, when you're learning these things. You're like, oh, I can solve all these things.
I saw somebody, Hope mentioned in the chat, just linking to the style, like how you include your CSS. So like a style sheet versus inline versus embedded.
Oh, that's a great one. That should be include. CSS.
When I was teaching in the classroom and I'd be showing them, I'd sort of tell them about inline, but then we'd just do like the embedded one at the top in the style tag at the beginning, because you're just doing a single page type of thing. And then I always ran into so much trouble when you'd be going, okay, now we're going to move our CSS to a separate file. And it was just like, well, why? We could just have it at the top. Like, well, we're doing a multi-page site now. It makes a lot more sense. You'd sort of show, like, I have examples. So like, let's play with this, update the file once, it changes everywhere. And then all of a sudden you'd get somebody who would like finish their first page and then start working on the second page and be like, oh, I don't need any of this, and delete like all the stuff they had. And I'm like, oh no, like what happened to my first page? I'm like, oh no.
Yeah, no, that's that like, but I remember like it doesn't make sense when I remember when I started coding that like linking a file just didn't make sense, because you're like, it's just witchcraft. Like, how does this file know that this content is here?
Yeah.
So it makes a lot more sense when you can read everything that's going on in a page, though. I'm guessing somebody asked about the page being shareable or something. I will share it afterwards. Yeah, I can make this public afterwards if people want it. I'll give it to you as well, Kevin, so you can share it in your Discord or whoever's watching this as well.
Awesome.
Dennis, you are already beautiful, so there's no more help with CSS. It's the Florida sun, too many days at the beach. You're just already tanned and gorgeous, so unfortunately, I think CSS is going to be lost on you. Okay, so we have language fundamentals, we have the inheritance and Cascade, and then we are going on to what next do you
the
reckon?
box model makes sense to me to go next.
I'm gonna format this stuff. I should be able to use some CSS on this page. Although I see and Notion just launched their API today as well,
Yes,
which is interesting.
I saw that, yeah.
The box model, I don't know why it's not. So I guess this is just what, padding,
margin, width, height,
border,
and borders. Yeah, of course.
And right.
And
anything else on that would be come in that kind of sticks out, like that would throw people with the box model?
I usually early on teach about just the box sizing property. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen somebody putting that as well. That's something I actually didn't learn for a couple of years.
Yeah, me too.
And it really threw me. I think it's something that can actually save a lot of hassle, because if you know the box sizing, it makes a lot more sense. It's actually confusing, I think, when you first see it, because you're like, why don't we always have it one way?
Yeah.
But again, it's one of those things that if you at least know it's there, it'll get you out of a hole at some point.
Yep. And I think that's a good one to learn early on, just because it makes it a lot easier to work when you have it set to the border box. So I'm trying to think with the box model. Yeah, that's about it. It's just making sure you understand how padding and borders and margins work.
The fundamentals will always be the hardest part of anything anyway. So yeah. I'm expecting everything else to be a little bit...
I mean, since we put not important, I would also say early on, I'd make it very don't set heights or fixed heights. Because people get in, especially when you're first learning, usually you're making static sites. You're not trying to make things responsive. And then as soon as so many people get into this bad habit of setting fixed heights on stuff because it works. And then all of a sudden you start trying to make a website responsive, and that habit can be really hard to break. And it's probably the thing it gets, if that's something you've been doing, you're kind of screwed. It's a hard habit to break. And
I should do this. Is that too nerdy?
I was actually reading, they have, the CSS working group has a page they put together, which is like mistakes that they made during, like, as the language developed that we can't undo. And one of the ones they actually said was they should have made important written differently, because in other programming languages, it reads as not important with the exclamation point.
Yeah.
So
that's true, yeah, as well. I forget again from using it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Danny Thompson has shown up as well.
Hey, Dan.
Hello, Danny. I don't know, Danny, have you started your new job yet? How is that going, if you have? I don't even know. I actually haven't chatted to Danny in a little while, so I'll have to catch up with him after this as well. Okay, here's where it gets interesting now. See, like, pseudo selectors are getting pushed down here a lot, but I feel like I've learned
enough
pseudo selectors before I learned everything else, because, like, I surely knew how to make something hover before I learned the box model.
Yeah, probably, yeah. I think, this would be a good point. I think, I mean, hover you could learn so early on. I just think, like, the priority of it isn't as high as learning those other things. So putting it here makes sense. It's a nice balance.
Yeah, well, do you know what? Your pseudo selectors could nearly go into some of the fundamentals, I guess. Because there's so many pseudo selectors, I guess you don't learn them all at once either.
Yeah.
So I'd be nearly saying like maybe pseudo selectors are for the notes, in a sense, or
yeah. I mean, yeah.
because like you have nth and like because like you wouldn't pick up nth straight away, or
No.
but like you will pick up hover straight away, and maybe before and after. So I guess then maybe the important ones to know are.
I mean, it's almost styling links becomes an important one, I guess, because that is one of those times where, in a way, maybe you could put just that into like the basics at the beginning is styling links, because it is one of those things where you change the font color and then the link color doesn't change, and then it's like, well, why doesn't that? Like, I think that is a bit of a fundamental. That could also lead to a discussion of like using dev tools, because I do think that dev tools in most learning paths come up a little too late. I think they're a fantastic way to learn what's happening because you can sort of
So
see.
would you say learn the dev tools? Where would you say learn the dev tools? Would it be before pseudo selectors or
It could be
during that journey?
Geez, I've never incorporated that. I mean, I usually
This is
bring it
going. This is going on the internet, so everyone's going to know that this is your opinion for life. Interesting, because I totally agree. The dev tools are because like often when I'm debugging things, I go into the dev tools and I say, "Oh, this is how that works now," and then I go and add it to the CSS.
Yeah. And so, I will put a note, if you're learning CSS, I would really strongly encourage using Firefox when you're first learning it, just because of the dev tools, because they actually, if a property doesn't, like in Chrome, if something's like you put a typo or it's an invalid property, it gets a little thing that says invalid property. But in Firefox, if you set a property on something that's a valid property, but it's not working for some reason, it tells you why. So like say you try doing, and it's a little advanced for like this early on, but if you try putting a justify content center, but you don't have display flex on it, it actually says like, this isn't working because it's not inside a flex, or this isn't a flex container or whatever. There's other examples of that too that I can't think of, but like it gives you little info bubbles telling you why things aren't working, even if they're valid properties. So like I think if you're a beginner, like you're learning CSS, that can be super frustrating when it looks like everything should work and it just doesn't function.
I'm kind of agreeing with Dubs here. Maybe this is a perfect one for when you're learning inheritance and cascading, because you'll actually be able to see it
getting crossed off.
That's actually a very good call there, Dubs, on that. So I will definitely throw that in here as a. I'm going to put these in as a kind of a sub note nearly of notes. Using the dev tools. Because again, like these things are never learned in isolation either.
Exactly.
So it's not like it's a clean fix to say we're just going to learn in this order and that's it, done.
Yeah.
And another thing I'm just seeing come in before we go off the box model is specificity. Should that be in here, or where should it go?
Again, I think I would do like an actual, like I sort of mentioned earlier when we said like element versus class versus ID. I think it's like we sort of mentioned there that one is more important than the other one, but I wouldn't deep dive it just because you're getting too much into the weeds and it doesn't apply. Like they won't understand the importance of it. I don't think I'd really get into specificity until you start getting into like more advanced selectors where you're using like a nested, you're doing, nav space A or something, because that's where specificity actually comes in and becomes a thing. And it's like, I think there it becomes more important. So that could be a little bit later on that I would probably deep dive specificity.
That makes total sense. So like you wouldn't put it in like the beginners toolkit, really. Yeah. It's not that important for the beginner's toolkit, I guess.
And like that
Um,
can, if somebody starts like freelancing and like, you know, you find something on some website where they, and you're copying and pasting code and then it's breaking things, you might not be able to fix it because of that, because you didn't learn it early on. But at one point, I do think like it's important when you're learning something new to not go into a topic you don't need to yet.
yeah, and I guess it'll probably come up somewhere within the fundamentals on the inheritance and cascade anyway. You'll see an example of it,
Exactly. Yeah.
and you mightn't totally understand it, but you'll see an example of it. Um, box model pseudo selectors. Then, what are the important ones?
I mean, I think early on you're mostly learning hover and focus. I don't know if there's any other ones that you'd need to do early on. Because even like, I mean,
I think before and after get used very quickly.
I'm a huge fan of before and after. I use them all the time. I just don't know when would be the best time to introduce them.
Like, I think the reason I would put these in and force them in here as well is because they are everywhere. And you start seeing sites and you're looking for
What is that? Yeah.
what is that thing? I think it introduces the whole world of like there is more bizarre selectors out there as well.
Yeah, that's true.
The hover focus before, after is. Do you put anything else in there? That's. I would say even let's put a. I'm going to say before, after as a stretch.
I've definitely got into like the nth of type, or well, the nth child, whatever, the different nth ones in the past, early-ish on, but I find like it's hard to come up with good examples to like show. Like it's usually if we're trying to style a table, which I tend to avoid as much as possible. So, exactly, yeah. And
it's even and odd usually. That's the ones that can pop up. I feel like when you're starting to learn these things, those examples will pop up as well. But I don't think you have to go out your way to learn them until you need them.
Yeah. And that's one of those times where it's like you're trying to solve a specific problem you have, and then you find out about it, and it works perfectly.
Aha, I love that. Before and after are not pseudo selectors. What would they be classified then if they're not?
They're pseudo elements.
Pseudo elements. Ah, okay. So maybe I'll have to remove them then. Stretch goal, pseudo elements. I'm correcting myself on this one as well because I actually didn't realize there was a different name for that. Hope has clearly done your course because he keeps on saying he said it in the chat that I need to do your course. Pseudo elements.
So that's the reason why they have like the double colon. I don't know why they decide. I guess it's elements because they're actually being like injected into the page, like it's content that's being injected.
Oh yeah,
into the DOM.
that makes sense. Yeah, you can read them on the DOM as well. That makes sense. Yeah. Excellent. Document flow, would that come next, or?
I would probably put that after layouts. Well, when you say document flow, what are you thinking exactly? Just before I say that.
This is actually where I was talking about kind of the HTML flows as well, like as in like really think about the inline block, like as in those basic. Yes. Basic layouts, like the fundamentals, like because sometimes you want that span to break things or something, and then
yes. So yeah, that is a good point for it actually. Before you start getting into like trying to build a layout, is understanding sort of the being able to do a display block, display. So at that point, I'm trying to think where that. Yeah, I have an example that I often comes up with. I mean, that also comes.
So is it different display options really here that we're kind of talking about?
And it does come in because it is the document flow when you're talking about like the I wouldn't get into formatting contexts, which is sort of what document flow falls into, but just the idea of like collapsing margins with block level stuff, I find comes up early on usually because what happens is somebody puts content. You have like a box with a paragraph in it, and you want to move the paragraph down, so you add margin top, and then the whole thing ends up moving down because of collapsing margins are the biggest pain in the ass ever. So I do think that comes up, and I think it's worth actually teaching collapsing margins because it's a problem that people don't understand what's happening when the problem arises. So just letting people know. So even with that, like you're going into the different display options, I would sort of take it as a chance to also go more into margin and padding again, margin padding border again, maybe, just to talk, like sort of reinforce what we already know about them.
So margin padding as a result of changing the display.
Yes.
That's actually a really good point, because I think that's what confused. It definitely, I can remember, don't mention the war. It's a case of like, that's definitely something that I think trips up a lot of people, is just like, why can't I add margin auto here?
Yes.
Why can't I use whatever? Why isn't this growing like I expected? So that's an interesting one. Is there anything else here? Will we put position as well?
I tend not to teach position just because I find it leads to bad habits. I tend to avoid teaching positioning until a lot, like really late on. And the way I see it too is a lot of the time I find positioning should be used as, like, I think it's super useful to know, but when you know it early on, you start using that to create layouts rather than using the layout tools. So I like doing it the other way around, where I teach layouts first, then I teach positioning. So you see, like, I can build my layout and then I can sort of use positioning to get what I need after that if something's not working.
So would you put that in after before responsive design? Because like you need position to do animations properly, I think.
Yes, yeah. 100%.
Because so like, would you put it before responsive design?
Yeah, I think it makes sense to put it around there.
Position. It feels like we're designing a syllabus together, really, at this stage. Just for, But I honestly thought this might be the most useful thing, is to kind of hash out like why you think something is important. Because I think when you go through a list like this, to get the opportunity to vocalize why you think something is important to learn in this order, will make somebody a little bit more confident in the steps to learn things as well. Different display options, margin padding as a result of display options. Layouts, I had put in here floats, percentages, flex, and grid. But are flex and grid too much for the beginner? Or are floats just not a thing anymore as well?
Yeah, I would take floats out. I think floats are worth learning, but not at the beginning, because you don't need them. And one of the reasons I like Flexbox so much is because you don't need to know very much. Grid, you sort of have to have like a bit of an understanding of it to start using it, because it's kind of rigid and you have to sort of declare a whole bunch of stuff before your layout will actually work. Whereas when you use Flex, like you just have to know, like, put a parent, put like a few children in there, and it makes columns. So if you just understand your document structure a little bit, and you know, like, the children will become the direct children will become columns, however many you put in there, like you can start making a layout. So I think like just understanding that and setting widths as percentages and stuff like that, you can start making something pretty quickly.
Anything else on the layouts then, really, that would?
No, I think that's just to get you started. And for most, especially if you're not even doing responsive layouts yet, I think you could get really far with just that.
Yeah, like I am not 100% on grid, so I totally agree, because I know when I need grid, and then I get the properties, because it's never in isolation either. It's usually whenever I was like, I wish that something would do this, and then grid does it. So yeah, I think those two would get you so far. Position. What are the important positions to know here, I guess?
Relative, absolute. I mean, fixed. I guess it's good to know fixed. And there's sticky. Sticky is, I mean, it's so cool that we can do that with only CSS. It's been so long we've had it now, and I'm still like blown away every time I use it.
Yeah.
It's such a silly little thing, but it's like, wow. And yeah, I'm wondering, is there anything else?
I don't. Sticky's actually one of the really cool ones, in fairness. I do like that. because I've done it so many times with JavaScript that it feels great.
Yeah.
Static, relative, fixed, absolute, sticky. What is a static position?
Static's the default, so you never actually set
Okay.
it. It's just what things are before you change the position.
Okay, that makes sense, and that's why I have not come across setting something as static. Then, interesting. I'm like that. This is a school lesson for me as well. I'm like, what's that basic thing? And again, that should give people some confidence that if you miss some of these things, you'll probably be fine.
Yeah. I also find static is such a bad name for it because I think the idea is it's static within the layout, but to me it doesn't feel static because it's, if you scroll the page, it's moving. That's not static in my opinion, but
yeah. No, I agreed. Okay, so layouts, percentage flex, relative. All right, we're nearly there. We're nearly there. Responsive design. This is media queries.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else that needs to really come up here? Because I would often say like this is a way to like double down on flex.
Yep, I was about to say the same thing. This is where you go deeper down into flex. Sort of where flex direction becomes a thing that becomes important.
Would you say it's a stretch goal, or should even like a beginner ever look at grid?
I don't. That's a good question. It could be a stretch goal.
But like, if you don't think it's important, then I would just say let's leave it out because like you don't want you. What I'm trying to hear is like let's give the least amount of things to become a competent developer.
If it's the least path of least resistance, I wouldn't touch grid yet. I think I use grid for more than I use. I won't say more, but I use grid a lot nowadays. But I just think it has a certain level of resistance and you don't need it early on. I think there's amazing things you can do with it.
I love we're getting argued with in the chat here as well. When can we start teaching grid layouts first? Grid first.
The only reason that I don't think it's the only reason I don't like teaching grid early. Like, I mean, browser support's there now. There's no reason that someone can't start using it early on. It's just I always like the path of least resistance, especially it's sort of like we were talking about before, where people won't like a language if they're getting frustrated by it. And I think that by trying to tackle grid early on, you're just going to have, before it starts clicking, there's going to be a lot more frustration. Just because there's too many pieces that you need to put in place for the layout. And there's new units that if you want to do like just a nice 3-column layout, and you're using like FRs, all of a sudden you're like, wait, there's a new unit. And then you see the repeat notation come up and there's all these new things that you've never seen before that to me, it just seems like it could be, you're adding this extra layer of complexity. So that's why I think flex is an easier first step.
I think I started to learn those like F4 things while I was streaming, building something. Right. Somebody in the chat actually taught me, Praveen, who is a great advocate in my Discord. He kind of looks after the whole thing for me at this stage. But he was like, yeah, it just means like it's an equivalent measure of something. And I was like, oh, okay, here I am panicking like live on stream going, oh, I look like an imposter. I was like, okay, now I can use this thing. But yeah, I totally agree. Like it's amazing how like a new thing comes up and you're like, oh, that's thrown me completely.
Mm-hmm.
Hope says, if you're going for basic developer, I wouldn't have animations on this list at all. Like I would argue that I want beginners to see animations because I think it really starts to open and unlock that part of your brain to say there is a lot you can do with this. Mm-hmm. I think it's a logical last step, because when you do something like even like a transition slowly, that when you see those kind of things, you're like, oh, okay, this is where I can really make something pop. I don't know if you would say remove it, but it's just the designer me says no, because that's where I was like, oh, CSS is cool.
Yeah. The other thing I like with animations is I find that they're good at reinforcing what you've already learned. And I'm like, what you're saying is like when we're building stuff, that's like the best time is when you're making stuff. You're learning the most when you're actually building things. And like lately on YouTube, I've had a few videos where I'm just building, like I made like a button with a neon glowy effect. I made a card with some interesting like animations and stuff. But you're taking so many other skills that you already have to know to make that happen. So when you're putting in like the hover animations I was putting on the card, like you're just reinforcing your understanding of positioning, you're reinforcing the pseudo select or your selectors, your specificity, because you have to go into specificity sometimes depending on how the animation's being triggered. And I don't think, like, I wouldn't be doing J type animations. Right? We're not going to be getting into the crazy world of
No,
like the insane,
but like seeing
just,
somebody like Jay's animations is a really nice thing. That's why I would think like opening that rabbit hole, because it's huge. Like there's all
oh,
like people have built their entire careers on CSS animations, and I think that's where you'll really see like the power of yeah, of like what CSS can do. So like what animations do you think are important early on? Like I would say like transition, keyframes. No, that's basically like, oh, I've pulled them up, but like but what else is there after that, I guess?
I mean, I'd say that's the crux of it. And then it's just, as I said, like I mean, you could even use animations if you wanted to get into talking about performance. Have fun, yeah. It could be like a way to touch off on performance, because I think animations is the first time where there's the issue. Oh, transform, yeah.
Yeah, so Michael threw that into the chat there as
Yeah.
well. I was like, that's a great one. Transform is something that even without animations, it used to come up before, like before there was fancy layouts. That transform was very helpful in different points to make some useful things for me. Maybe I just didn't know how to use the fancy layouts, but like I've definitely abused transform to places it shouldn't have been done. So I like transform.
You can do opacity in there too. Just if it hadn't come up yet, it's a time where you could dive into that.
Yeah. Because I think that, like, for me, the reason I still learn animations is because I think if you've gotten this far in the journey and really like know these things, that's when you'll start seeing, oh, I can actually have fun with this. Would you add any other notes to this list?
Yeah, I saw someone in the chat. Sorry, I didn't bring it up at the time because we were talking about something else. But somebody had mentioned like the different units and talking about Ms and Rems. Obviously, there's the pixels. Like, I think it is an important thing to talk about, and it is one thing I always struggle about. Like, at the beginning, I always say go with pixels because again, I'm very big on the path of least resistance. So generally, people can understand pixels very, very easily. And then I'm like, when do I make that transition to start talking about Ms and Rems? And then I wouldn't even really get into any of the other I guess Ms, Rems, and percentages. We talked about percentage, I think, at one point.
I haven't talked about Z index though either, which is another thing.
That could come up with like the positioning, the relative absolute fixed sticky. Z index fits into there nicely.
So what we'd say this is just sizing units. Or does that come after animations, or where would you put this? That's a very interesting one, because I do think this is something I learned way too late. But it's also, I guess, one of those things you can go without.
I think it's important to get into using M and Rem, especially with, like, for me, it's a thing I'd like to cover. I just don't know when to. Oh, somebody just rang my doorbell. Oh, I know.
You can go run and say hello. Yeah, run.
Okay.
Say hello. I've kept you already longer. When you come back, we'll finish up. So
okay, sorry about that.
You're okay. Go. Okay. Let me have a little look. So Rem, when do people think in the chat for the other. Let's see, properties like, oh yes, rem m, border radius, box sizing, hope of glory is on fire. This is literally the hope of glory. So we will say border radius and box shadow. Perfect. So I think once you have that's it. And I think the problem is, Brent, that we would do that all day as well. That's the danger in all of this. And what do you mean navigation, Sabrina? Or like, are you thinking of like the HTML elements to navigate, or are you talking about like a style on the navigation, like building a nav?
I'm gonna have to run.
No problem. This
I'm
is
sorry.
gone way over. So you fire ahead, Kevin. Kevin, I was meant to end this like over a half hour ago as well. So it was great having you. Let me just pull up. We've got the end of it as well. Thanks a million for coming.
Of course.
You go and deal with whatever fires after opening up in the back of the house.
Yeah.
And we'll talk to you soon. So
Awesome.
thanks a million for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun. And if ever,
No.
we should do it again another time.
For sure. Absolutely. I will take less of your time. I promise.
No, don't worry about it. It was a lot of fun. I don't mind at all. I'd stick around for another 2 hours if I could.
Excellent. Right. Look, I'll let you go. Thank you. And yeah, I'll talk to you soon. We'll organize another one again soon.
Awesome.
See you
Bye,
after.
everybody. Thanks all for joining us.
Thanks. I'm going to throw this back up on the screen for a minute. Let's see if there's anything else. I think that's everything. So I won't hold it up too much longer. What I'm going to do with this note here is I'm going to just look at it, make sure there's nothing I'd like to add or any more notes, and I will attach a link to this in the description of the video. So thanks a million for everyone who came. I had a great time. It was great to have Kevin here, and I hope you learned something. And next time, I'm here usually on Fridays as well. So we'll be talking more nonsense. We'll be having more beer. And I'm looking forward to seeing you next. I'll see everyone later. Let me see. I'll pump up things. So there we go. Now I can wave. I'm here at the big screen on. So I'll see everyone next time. Thanks a million. And talk to you later. Have a great weekend, everyone.